Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a really compelling narrative today. It's drawn from a series of excerpts that give us a surprisingly complex look at family, grief, and maybe what lies beyond.
That's right. The source material really takes us on quite a journey. It starts with that immediate, very human drama of loss, but then it sort of expands into these spiritual realms. It hints at connections that potentially span lifetimes.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this story, not just, give a summary, but really pull out the core insights it presents. We want to explore these different perspectives on grief, relationships, spiritual survival, and honestly, this fascinating idea that our present might be shaped by a much, much deeper past.
We begin with a family just thrown into crisis by a sudden death. But like you said, the story quickly broadens out. We get the viewpoint of the person who actually passed away, and it opens the door to these ideas about spiritual existence and how that might actually intertwine with the world of the living.
Okay, let's dig into that initial situation then. The story opens with a really stark event. Elisa is gone. She's left behind her husband, Eugenio, and their three kids, Marina, Nelinia, and Juninho.
And the source immediately highlights Eugenio's reaction, which is, well, it's quite striking, isn't it? It describes him as cold, almost, preoccupied straight away with practical things, how he looks for work, his car.
Right. There's this clear sense his mind is just somewhere else entirely.
Yeah, specifically on his new relationship with Eunice, who, is also called Lourdes in the text. That comes across very strongly.
And the source gives us this really telling detail about his complaint, too. He apparently felt Elisa spent too much.
But then we also hear Elisa's side, or what she felt. That she couldn't even afford basic things like a haircut or new dresses, often wearing hand-me-downs from her sister Olivia.
So what's the insight there? What's the source showing us about their marriage dynamic?
Well, it points to a fundamental disconnect, doesn't it? I mean, he felt financial strain or maybe used it as a complaint, while she felt genuinely deprived. The source seems to be painting a picture of a marriage where their realities were just completely different, possibly fueled by his attention being elsewhere.
Absolutely. Then Olivia arrives on the scene, finds the kids.
Alone, locked in the house. Her anguish is just immediate, Oh, palpable as she searches for Eugenio.
And when she finds him, her reaction is just intense.
Oh, yeah. She confronts him directly, accuses him, questions his feelings for Elisa, especially thinking about everything Elisa did for him, how she sort of dedicated herself to him, his well-being. The source shows Olivia's raw grief and her immediate suspicion pointing right at Eugenio.
And the poor children are just caught in the middle of all this. Nelinia, she voices that very childlike fear of death being forever.
Right. And Marina, the oldest, she's filled with this bitter resentment towards her father. The source actually shows her overhearing his plans.
About possibly living with lords.
Exactly. And she just vows she won't go, absolutely refuses. And Juninho, the youngest, he just kind of retreats into needing stories. Simple comfort.
What's the insight there, do you think, about how they're processing it?
It's how differently children cope with grief and massive change, isn't it? Nelinia fears the finality. Marina rebels against the unfairness, her father's apparent indifference. Juninho seeks refuge in the familiar. The source just paints this picture of a family unit instantly fractured, confused.
And Eugenio is quickly overwhelmed by the practical side of things.
Yeah, he realizes he's completely out of his depth, doesn't know how to manage the house, the kids.
The source shows his first ideas are kind of, not great. Getting a maid, asking Olivia's mother.
Who, the text notes, refused to look after any grandchildren, not just these ones.
Right. And then he thinks about asking Olivia to just move in permanently.
Yes, and all while his focus is still split. He's annoyed about being late for work, cuts himself shaving because he's rushing.
Blaming his late night with Eunice Lourdes for it?
Exactly. And after talking to the Dr. Eduardo, the text mentions the advice he gets is basically, just live your life. Enjoy yourself.
So his decision based on that is?
Continue seeing Lourdes, just, outside of home hours, make sure he's back by 8 for the children. Doesn't seem like the most involved parenting plan initially.
He does make some early attempts, though, right? To connect, taking them out.
He does, tries to please them. The source gives us that specific, quite poignant moment, seeing Nelinia with an ice cream mustache.
And he feels something then.
Deeply touched, it says. Realizes the weight of his responsibility. It's all on him now.
But even that gesture doesn't quite land, does it?
No, because the hurt is still there. Marina's response to the outing is just so blunt. I didn't like it. I preferred to stay home. It really underscores her resistance, the depth of the wound.
Yeah, it shows that those gestures, they aren't easily accepted when trust is well, broken.
Precisely. The insight seems to be that rebuilding that connection takes more than just a trip to the zoo.
Okay, so here's where the source, like, shifts gears pretty dramatically. And for me, this is where it gets really interesting. We suddenly move from all this earthly drama to Elisa's perspective
Yeah.
after her death.
Right, and her initial state is just profound confusion. She's asking herself, why did I leave that night? Was I hit by a car? She can't remember anything.
And the longing for her children.
Intense, immediate. The source emphasizes that pain of separation. She feels it right away.
She's present. She's watching what's happening in the house. She feels anguish, especially when Olivia thinks about leaving them.
But then the terrifying reality hits her. She can't be seen, can't be heard. The despair when she finally grasps that she's actually died, it's powerful.
What's the insight here from the source's perspective?
It seems to be about that initial disorientation,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also the continuation of emotional ties. That connection to her earthly life, especially her kids, doesn't just sever instantly.
And then the source introduces this structured spiritual realm.
Yes, Elisa finds herself in a place that feels like a tribunal or some kind of organization. And here she starts to learn about laws of life, about reincarnation.
And crucially, about the ability of spirits to actually interact with the living.
Right. Figures like Gyro and Sabino are mentioned, part of this guiding structure. So the insight the source offers about the afterlife here isn't like a void or just harps and clouds. It's presented as a place of structure, learning, and ongoing purpose.
And Elisa's emotional state? Is she peaceful?
Far from it initially. The source details her anger, her resentment. She feels betrayed by Eugenio, definitely. But she also starts regretting her own life choices, her passivity.
There's a reflection on her naivety compared to how wrong she feels now.
Exactly. She even thinks about how she suppressed her own passionate temperament, thinking it was wrong. While Eugenio apparently preferred someone more, the text says, ardente fiery.
So this internal reflection, it's prompted by her new state.
It seems so. That's a key insight from the source here. Death, in this narrative, it isn't just an end. It brings a kind of clarity. It forces this introspection about your earthly life, your choices. Her resentment isn't just aimed outward at Eugenio, but inward at herself, too.
Okay, this brings us to a really significant parallel narrative the source introduces. Elisa, now part of this spiritual organization, gets an assignment.
Right, she's given a task to help a woman named Inés. Inés is suffering in a difficult marriage to a man named Carlos.
And the source presents this case as being deliberately similar to Elisa's own situation.
Yes, but with this deeper historical context, we learn it involves Inés's deceased father, Gilberto, who's also a spirit in this organization now, and a whole history involving Carlos and Inés across past lives.
And Carlos is depicted how?
As cruel, unfaithful, dishonest, both in this life and apparently in the past one too. And Adalberto, the father, is actively seeking a kind of spiritual justice for wrongs done to him and Inés previously.
Wow. So the insight here isn't just about, spirits helping people. It's about how these tasks can be deeply tied to the spirit's own past, their growth, and how past lives might create these ongoing dynamics.
Exactly. Elisa's role becomes one of direct spiritual intervention. She's tasked with helping Inés see Carlos for who he really is, encouraging her to leave him. And she learns specific techniques to do this.
Techniques? Like what?
Yes. The source describes her learning how to use energy, it calls it magnetization, to influence the living. This is presented as a way spirits can subtly affect thoughts, feelings, maybe even circumstances back on Earth.
The narrative follows Elisa's attempts then. We see her trying to influence Inés.
We do. We see Inés's despair, her physical health declining. The source even describes these direct spiritual confrontations, Adalberto apparently influencing Carlos directly.
And it introduces this concept of spiritual justice, like being actively carried out.
Yes, even mentioning a sentence being enacted against Carlos. The insight is really a depiction of a spiritual world that's not passive, but actively intervening in human affairs, seemingly based on karmic history and a sense of justice.
And how does this affect Elisa engaging in this task?
Well, the source notes her empathy for Inés grows. Because their situations feel so similar, helping Inés starts to feel like helping herself. This task becomes part of Elisa's own journey of healing, moving beyond her own personal pain and resentment.
Okay, let's shift back now to the main family narrative back on Earth. So against this backdrop of Elisa learning and acting in the spirit world, the source starts showing us signs. bridges between these two worlds.
Yeah, and a key moment is Nalina's illness. She has this fever, and in her delirium, as the text calls it.
She describes seeing Elisa.
Yes, and specifically mentions a mark on Elisa's forehead. Olivia is there and confirms, yes, that mark was there after the accident. It's a detail that children absolutely couldn't have known.
And this unsettles Eugenio.
Deeply, the source notes. It makes the spiritual seem suddenly very real, very close.
So what's the insight there? The source seems to be suggesting that communication from the spirit world is possible, right? Maybe through these altered states, like fever.
Exactly, and that it can carry these verifiable details, things unknown in the physical world. It sort of validates the spiritual experience for the characters involved.
And Eugenio himself starts experiencing things, physical symptoms.
He does. Sudden dizziness, nausea, feeling faint. Particularly, the source points out, during intimate moments with Lourdes. And doctors can't find anything medically wrong with him.
And Lourdes, she has her own interpretation.
She does. The source says she has some spiritual understanding. She interprets his symptoms and also this brief, terrifying vision she has of a furious Elisa attacking Eugenio.
She sees it as spiritual interference.
An attack.
Direct interference.
Yeah.
She suggests Elisa is angry, seeking revenge, and she's the one who encourages Eugenio to seek help from a spiritist center. Interesting. So the insight there is the source's perspective that spiritual states, like anger or unresolved issues, can actually have tangible physical and emotional effects on the living.
Right. And that people with a certain spiritual framework might recognize and interpret these signs differently than, say, a medical doctor would.
Meanwhile, Olivia is also seeking answers, seeking comfort.
Yes. And she encounters a man named Aro. He introduces her to Spiritism, explains the core ideas, the survival of the spirit, the possibility of communication. He encourages her to study it, look for proof herself.
And Olivia actually goes to a spiritist center.
She does. The source presents this as a place for learning, for potential interaction with the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And immediately upon entering, she feels something, a presence.
And physical discomfort, too.
Yeah, chills, yawning, feeling sleepy, which Amaro apparently attributes to a spirit trying to sort of push her away, prevent her from staying and learning.
And she witnesses mediumship there.
Yes, she sees a spirit apparently speaking through a medium, a woman named Marilda.
Okay, so the source is really showing different characters now bumping up against potential spiritual influence.
Yeah.
And it's leading some of them towards seeking understanding in these specific spiritual practices or communities.
Exactly. It's becoming a more central part of their reality.
And as all this is swirling around, we see a really significant shift happening in the relationship between Olivia and Eugenio back home.
Absolutely. Olivia starts to soften towards him, especially seeing how vulnerable he is during Nalina's illness.
He starts relying on her support more, opening up.
Very much so. And in these moments of openness, he confesses his struggles, admits he failed as a father, failed in his marriage to Elisa.
What does he say specifically?
He admits things like, Elisa cared for everything, I was inexperienced. He says he felt like a stranger in his own home, that he never really connected with the kids because Elisa just handled it all.
Does he talk about why he felt disconnected from Elisa?
He does. He confesses his desire for love, passion, romance, things he felt Elisa couldn't provide. It's quite a raw admission.
The insight here seems to be how crisis can just break down those barriers. Right? Forces an honest look at yourself, reveals deeper truths about past relationships that maybe weren't faced before.
Definitely. And while this is happening on Earth, Elisa, on the spiritual plane, is also continuing her own growth.
How so?
The source describes her starting to reflect more deeply on her own life, recognizing her own dependency on Eugenio, yes, but also on Olivia, acknowledging her own mistakes, even feeling a sense of ingratitude.
So she's moving past just the resentment. Considering forgiveness.
It seems that way. She's beginning that process. It's less about blame and more about understanding her own part in how things were.
And then comes this huge revelation from the source that connects everything.
Yes, the past life stuff. Elisa learns first from another spiritual guide named Vera, and then later confirmed by her own mother as a spirit.
Learns what exactly? About their connections.
That she, Eugenio, Olivia, and even the children were all connected in a past life. Specifically that Olivia, in that life, was named Maria Clara, and Eugenio was Maria Clara's lover.
Wow, okay. And the children?
The children in this current life were apparently their children from that previous life. Maria Clara and Eugenio's children.
Okay, that's a huge insight the source is presenting. What's the implication?
Well, the source suggests this past life connection could explain the intense, almost historical dislike Olivia always felt towards Eugenio, because Maria Clara, in that past life, was heartbroken. She sought revenge when her lover Eugenio left her to go back to his established family.
So it adds this entirely different layer. It reframes their current complicated bond, their shared history, everything.
Completely. It suggests their present is deeply interwoven with this unresolved past.
And Elisa's process. How does she react to all this?
It seems to be part of her coming to terms with things, accepting her death, realizing she can't go back to her physical life. She finds solace in this spiritual learning, focuses on her own growth, on helping others like Inés.
And her connection to her children.
The source notes she realizes she can still feel their presence, that she can influence them energetically in a positive way. It's a different kind of connection now.
Okay, so this all builds towards a really powerful culmination point in the story. Nalina becomes critically ill, hospitalized.
Yes, she's in critical condition, and Eugenio is just distraught, completely vulnerable. He confesses his fear, relies incredibly heavily on Olivia.
And Olivia's there for him.
She is. The source shows her providing comfort, support during this intense hospital vigil, and through that, she witnesses his genuine love and fear for their daughter, his raw humanity.
And this shared experience, this intense anxiety, that's the critical moment for the relationship.
It seems to be. The source portrays it as the point where their bond deepens profoundly. That shared grief and worry, it just dissolves Olivia's long-held resentment. Seeing him like that changes everything for her.
So after Nalina thankfully recovers, the narrative reaches its earthly climax, perhaps.
You could say that. Eugenio takes a really dramatic step. He expresses these deep feelings he now has for Olivia.
What does he say?
He tells her she is the woman he sought his whole life, that she possesses the qualities he always needed. He even explicitly says his marriage with Elisa was a mistake from the start, citing their different temperaments.
Wow, he really puts it out there.
He does, and he asks her to marry him, citing not just, the practical need for stability for the children, but explicitly his own need for her love, her passion.
And Olivia's response?
She asks for time to think, to analyze her feelings, which seems wise given everything, but eventually she accepts. She agrees to move in and marry him.
So this sets the stage for a whole new future for this family unit, but one that carries all the weight of their complex shared past, right? Both in this life and, according to the source, maybe others too.
Exactly. It's a new beginning, but one deeply informed by everything that came before. It might heal old wounds or maybe navigate new complexities rooted in that shared history.
And Lisa, what's her perspective as this happens?
Well, from the spiritual realm, she observes these events. The source shows her continuing her own journey, learning, helping others like Inés, accepting her new reality. She's no longer solely focused on revenge or her own loss.
She's seeking peace, understanding.
It seems so. And acknowledging her own past mistakes in the whole dynamic, her journey doesn't just end when the earthly plot finds a resolution. It continues on a different plane.
So this deep dive, it really took us on quite a ride, didn't it? From that raw, immediate grief and conflict within a family.
Right, dealing with sudden loss.
Into this spiritual realm, watching the deceased navigate a completely new reality.
Exploring that parallel story, suggesting spiritual justice, past life karma.
Seeing those signs bridging the worlds, the physical symptoms, the visions.
And finally returning to the earthly plane where relationships fundamentally shift and new beginnings emerge, but all framed by this potentially ancient history.
The core insights we can pull from this source seem pretty varied then. There's the shock and confusion of that spiritual transition.
Yeah, and the potential for spiritual intervention, maybe even justice, based on that karmic history idea.
The suggestion that our earthly relationships can be influenced by unseen forces, or maybe rooted in these past life dynamics.
And the transformative power of self-reflection, forgiveness, both for the living and the deceased in this story.
And how shared crisis can just completely shift perspectives and break down old barriers.
Definitely. It covers a lot of ground thematically.
It really does. And it leaves us with a truly provocative thought to maybe chew on, building right on the source's central kind of radical premise. What if the deepest connections, maybe the most intense conflicts you experience in your own life, what if they aren't just starting now? What if they're echoes of journeys you've already taken long before this life?
What might you learn about yourself, about others, if you considered the possibility of a much, much longer story playing out underneath the surface of the present?
Something to think about.